The sound of my wife arguing with our daughter drifted through the kitchen window as I crouched beside my beat-up pickup truck, wrestling with a busted taillight. The autumn air in our little Midwest town carried their voices like a curse I couldn't escape. "You'll never be enough for her, Dad." Lila's 16-year-old voice cut through the evening stillness. "Mom says you're stuck in this town. Trevor actually gets her. He's not afraid to show her off." I froze, my hand still gripping the plastic housing of the taillight. Trevor. That name hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. Trevor Mansfield, my old drinking buddy from high school. The guy who sold used cars with the enthusiasm of a snake oil salesman and the morals to match. "Lila, keep your voice down," Sienna hissed, but not quietly enough. "Your father doesn't understand what it means to have ambition." I stayed crouched behind the truck, hidden in the shadows cast by our neighbor Mrs. Dorsey's porch light. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, literally hiding in the dark while my family discussed my inadequacies. Sienna continued, her voice taking on that sharp edge I'd grown to recognize over the past year. "Trevor appreciates quality. He knows how to treat a woman who deserves better than this." She must have gestured at our modest 2-story house, the one I'd worked 16-hour days to afford when we first got married. The taillight housing cracked in my grip. Plastic shards bit into my palm, but I barely felt it. 15 years of marriage, and this is what it came down to. My wife comparing me unfavorably to a guy who couldn't sell water in a desert without lying about its source. I stood up slowly, brushing the plastic fragments from my hands. Through the kitchen window, I could see Sienna pacing back and forth, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the overhead light. She'd always been beautiful, the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. But lately, that beauty felt like a weapon she wielded against me. "Mom, maybe you should just talk to him," Lila said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Talk to him about what? About how his little tech startup is going nowhere? About how embarrassing it is when my colleagues ask what my husband does for a living?" Sienna's laugh was bitter. "Trevor owns 3 car lots now. 3. He's expanding into the city." I'd heard enough. I walked around to the front of the truck and made a show of slamming the hood, letting them know I was there. The kitchen went silent immediately. When I walked through the front door, Lila was already halfway up the stairs, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Sienna stood by the kitchen counter, pouring herself a glass of wine with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing it more often lately. "How was your day, honey?" she asked without looking at me, her voice artificially sweet. "Productive," I said, settling into my usual chair at the kitchen table. "Fixed the Henderson account issue, got 3 new client inquiries, and discovered my wife thinks I'm a failure. So, typical Tuesday." Sienna's hand paused halfway to her lips. "You were listening." "Hard not to when you're broadcasting it to the neighborhood." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. "Trevor, huh? Interesting choice." She set down her wine glass with more force than necessary. "I don't know what you think you heard." "I heard my daughter tell me I'll never be enough for you, and I heard you agree with her." My voice stayed level, controlled. 15 years in tech support had taught me the value of staying calm when everything was falling apart. "I heard you praise Trevor Mansfield's business acumen, which is hilarious considering he's been investigated by the state attorney general twice for odometer fraud." Sienna's cheeks flushed pink. "You always have to tear people down, don't you? You can't stand that someone else might be more successful than you." "Successful?" I laughed, and even I could hear the edge in it. "Sienna, the man sells cars with rolled-back odometers and charges extra for premium floor mats he buys in bulk from China. If that's your definition of success, we need to have a longer conversation." She grabbed her wine glass and headed for the stairs. "I'm not doing this with you tonight, Jake. Some of us have important meetings in the morning." "With Trevor?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, her back still to me. "He's a potential client for the firm. We're discussing a marketing campaign for his expansion." "Right. Marketing." I nodded slowly. "Well, make sure you charge him your full rate. Wouldn't want him to think you're cheap." The look she shot me over her shoulder could have melted steel. Then she was gone, her heels clicking against the hardwood stairs like a countdown timer. I sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the house settle around me. Upstairs, I could hear Lila's muffled voice as she talked on the phone, probably to one of her friends, probably about what a loser her father was. The thing is, I wasn't a loser, not really. My tech startup, Dataflow Solutions, wasn't exactly Silicon Valley material, but it was solid. I'd built it from nothing, working out of our basement for the first 3 years while Sienna climbed the corporate ladder at her marketing firm. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Or at least, I thought we were. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Gabe Morrison's number. Gabe ran the boxing gym downtown, a converted warehouse that smelled like sweat and determination. He'd been trying to get me back in the ring for months. "Jake?" Gabe's gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "What's up, man? It's past 9. You still open?" "For you? Always. You sound like you need to hit something." "More than you know." 20 minutes later, I was standing in Gabe's gym, wrapping my hands with practiced efficiency. The place was nearly empty except for one guy working the speed bag in the corner. The rhythmic pounding matched my heartbeat. Gabe watched me warm up, his weathered face creased with concern. He'd been a professional boxer back in the day, fought some big names before a detached retina ended his career. Now he spent his time teaching guys like me how to channel our frustration into something productive. "Want to talk about it?" he asked as I started working the heavy bag. "Wife thinks I'm not good enough for her lifestyle," I said between punches. "Apparently I lack ambition." "That's rich, coming from someone who married an entrepreneur." Gabe held the bag steady as I increased the intensity. "You built a business from scratch, Jake. That takes guts." "Tell that to Sienna. She's impressed with Trevor Mansfield these days." Gabe's eyebrows shot up. "Slick Trevor? The car guy?" "The very same." "Huh." Gabe was quiet for a moment. "You know, my cousin bought a car from him last year. A piece of junk broke down 3 weeks later. Trevor claimed it was a pre-existing condition, not covered by his warranty. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories." I stopped punching and looked at Gabe. "Really?" "Really. There's been talk around town. Nothing official, but people are starting to wise up to his act." Gabe shrugged. "Of course, some folks are impressed by flash over substance." I unwrapped my hands slowly, thinking. "Gabe, what do you know about gathering information on someone?" "Information?" Gabe's eyes narrowed. "What kind of information?" "The kind that reveals who someone really is underneath all the polish." Gabe was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "Jake, I've known you for 5 years. You're not the vindictive type, but I've also seen what betrayal can do to a good man." He paused. "Just promise me you'll be smart about whatever you're thinking." "Smart is my middle name." "No, it's not. It's William. I've seen your membership forms." Gabe cracked a rare smile. "But I get your point." I drove home through the quiet streets of our town, past the shuttered storefronts and flickering streetlights that gave the place its particular brand of faded charm. Sienna called it declining. I called it home. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Sienna's car was there, but so was another vehicle I didn't recognize, a silver BMW with dealer plates. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I sat in my truck for a moment, staring at that BMW. Then I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the license plate, just in case. The front door was unlocked, which was unusual. Sienna was paranoid about security, always checking the locks twice before bed. I could hear voices coming from the living room, Sienna's laugh, light and musical, the way it used to sound when we were dating. I kicked off my shoes loudly, making sure they knew I was home. The voices stopped immediately. "Jake?" Sienna called out. "We're in the living room." I walked in to find my wife sitting on our couch next to Trevor Mansfield himself. He looked exactly like I remembered. Too much gel in his hair, too much cologne on his skin, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, all flash and no substance. "Jake, buddy." Trevor stood up and extended his hand like we were old friends. "Good to see you, man. Sienna was just showing me your setup here. Nice place." I shook his hand briefly. His grip was firm but sweaty. "Trevor, what brings you by so late?" "Oh, you know how it is in business. Sometimes inspiration strikes at odd hours." He gestured vaguely at the papers spread across our coffee table. "Sienna's been helping me brainstorm some marketing ideas for the new lot." I glanced at the papers. They were mostly blank except for a few doodles and what looked like a phone number written in Trevor's handwriting. "Brainstorming," I repeated. "Right." Sienna stood up quickly, gathering the papers. "We were just finishing up. Trevor was about to leave." "No rush," I said, settling into my chair across from them. "I'm interested in hearing about this expansion, Trevor. 3 lots now, right? That's quite an accomplishment." Trevor's chest puffed out a little. "Well, you know what they say. You've got to spend money to make money. I'm not afraid to take risks." "Unlike some people," Sienna added quietly, but not quietly enough. I ignored the jab and focused on Trevor. "What's your secret? I mean, the car business is tough these days. Lots of competition, online sales, consumer protection laws. How do you stay ahead of the curve? Trevor's smile flickered for just a moment. You've got to give people what they want, Jake. Quality vehicles at fair prices, customer service that goes above and beyond. That's interesting. I heard from Gabe Morrison that his cousin had some trouble with a car he bought from you last year. Something about a warranty issue? The room went very quiet. Trevor's smile became strained. You can't please everyone, Jake. Some customers have unrealistic expectations. Of course. I nodded sympathetically. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. These things happen in business. Sienna was looking back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match. Trevor, maybe we should continue this discussion tomorrow at the office. Good idea. Trevor stood up again, straightening his expensive tie. Jake, it was great catching up, man. We should grab a drink sometime, talk about the old days. I'd like that, I said, though we both knew it would never happen. I walked them to the door, playing the part of the gracious host. As Trevor stepped outside, he turned back to me. You're a lucky man, Jake. Sienna's got a brilliant mind for marketing. You should be proud. Oh, I am, I said. Very proud. After they left, I stood at the window and watched Trevor's BMW pull out of our driveway. Sienna had gone upstairs without saying goodnight, which was becoming a pattern. I walked back to the living room and looked at the coffee table where they'd been brainstorming. There was a faint impression on the notepad where someone had written something and then torn off the page. I held it up to the light and could just make out the indentations. Room 237, Riverside Motel, Thursday 9th p.m. I set the notepad down carefully and walked to my home office. It was time to do some research on Trevor Mansfield's business practices. If Sienna wanted to be impressed by success, maybe I should show her what real success looked like. The kind that didn't require lying to customers or meeting married women in cheap motels. I fired up my laptop and started typing. The internet was a wonderful thing when you knew how to use it properly, and after 15 years in tech, I definitely knew how to use it. By the time I went to bed, I had a folder full of interesting information about Trevor's business dealings. Nothing illegal, necessarily, but definitely the kind of stuff that might make someone think twice about doing business with him. Sienna was already asleep, or pretending to be. She'd moved to the far edge of the bed, as far away from me as possible without falling off. I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathe, and started planning my next move. Tomorrow was Wednesday. Thursday was still a day away, but I had a feeling it was going to be very educational. I woke up Wednesday morning to the sound of Sienna's shower running and the smell of coffee brewing downstairs. For a moment, I almost forgot about the previous night. Then I saw the empty space where she usually kept her phone charger, and reality came flooding back. Lila was in the kitchen when I came down, hunched over a bowl of cereal and scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I entered, and I caught a flicker of something that might have been guilt in her eyes. Morning, kiddo, I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Morning. She went back to her phone immediately. Anything interesting happening in the world of social media? She shrugged. Just the usual drama. You know how it is. I didn't, actually. I'd never been much for social media, which Sienna frequently reminded me was another sign of my failure to adapt to the modern world. But maybe it was time to start paying attention. What platforms are you on these days? I asked casually. Lila looked up suspiciously. Why? Just curious. Your old man's trying to stay current. Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, the basics. She paused. Nah. Mom says you should get on LinkedIn if you want to grow your business. Your mom says a lot of things. Sienna chose that moment to walk into the kitchen, dressed in a sharp business suit that I didn't recognize. She looked polished and professional, like she was heading to an important meeting. Good morning, she said briskly, not making eye contact with either of us. She grabbed a travel mug and filled it with coffee. Big day today? I asked. Client presentation at 10, lunch meeting at noon, and then I'm working late on the Mansfield account. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was reading from a schedule. The Mansfield account. Right. I took a sip of coffee. How's that going, by the way? Fine. Trevor's very hands-on with his marketing. He likes to be involved in every detail. I bet he does. Sienna finally looked at me, her expression carefully neutral. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just that it's nice to see someone so dedicated to their business. Lila was looking back and forth between us again, her spoon suspended halfway to her mouth. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I have to go, Sienna said, grabbing her purse and heading for the door. Lila, make sure you clean up after breakfast. Jake, don't forget you promised to fix the garbage disposal. I hadn't promised any such thing, but I let it slide. After she left, Lila and I sat in awkward silence for a few minutes. "Dad," she said finally, "are you and Mom okay?" It was a loaded question from a 16-year-old who was old enough to sense the undercurrents, but young enough to hope they weren't real. "We're going through a rough patch," I said carefully. "But that's between your mother and me. You don't need to worry about it." "But I heard you guys fighting last night, and Mom's been acting weird lately, and—" "Lila." I set down my coffee mug and looked at her directly. "Whatever happens between your mother and me, it doesn't change how we feel about you. You know that, right?" She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. I wanted to say more, to reassure her somehow, but what could I say? That her mother was having an affair with a sleazy car dealer? That our marriage was probably over? That I was planning to expose them both in the most humiliating way possible? Instead, I finished my coffee and headed to my office. I spent the morning working on legitimate business, updating client databases, responding to emails, troubleshooting a server issue for one of my bigger accounts. But my heart wasn't in it. My mind kept drifting to that notepad impression and what it meant. Around 11, I decided to take a drive. The Riverside Motel was on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask too many questions. I'd driven past it countless times, but never really paid attention. It was exactly what you'd expect. A single-story building with peeling paint and a parking lot full of potholes. The kind of place that advertised cable TV and air conditioning like they were luxury amenities. Room 237 was on the far end, tucked away from the main road. I sat in my truck across the street, studying the layout. There was a diner next door with a good view of the motel parking lot. If someone wanted to keep an eye on who was coming and going, it would be the perfect spot. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Gabe. Free for lunch? Got some info you might find interesting." I texted back. "On my way." Gabe's gym was busier during lunch hour, filled with office workers trying to squeeze in a quick workout. I found him in his office, a cluttered space that doubled as a storage room for boxing equipment. "Close the door," he said when he saw me. I did, then sat down in the folding chair across from his desk. "What have you got?" "I made some calls about your friend Trevor." Gabe leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. "Turns out my cousin isn't the only one with complaints." He handed me a manila folder. Inside were printouts of online reviews, Better Business Bureau complaints, and what looked like a local newspaper article. "The reviews are interesting," Gabe said. "Lots of people complaining about high-pressure sales tactics, hidden fees, and cars that break down right after the warranty expires. But here's the thing. Most of these complaints are recent, like within the last 6 months." I flipped through the papers. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Trevor's business practices had taken a sharp turn for the worse recently. "Any idea what changed?" I asked. "That's where it gets interesting." Gabe pointed to the newspaper article. "Trevor's been expanding fast. Too fast, maybe. Word is he's leveraged to the hilt, borrowed against everything he owns to finance the new lots." I read the article, which was a puff piece about local entrepreneurs but contained some telling details between the lines. Trevor had indeed expanded rapidly, going from one small lot to 3 larger ones in less than 2 years. That kind of growth required serious capital. "So he's desperate for cash," I said. "Desperate enough to cut corners, apparently. And desperate enough to—" Gabe trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "To what?" "Look, I don't like spreading gossip, but you asked me to look into this guy." Gabe shifted in his chair. "There's talk that Trevor's been getting cozy with some of the wives of his business competitors. Married women with connections, if you know what I mean." My stomach clenched. "What kind of connections?" "The kind that can help a guy get financing, or favorable terms from suppliers, or inside information on upcoming developments." Gabe's expression was grim. "I'm not saying that's what's happening with Sienna, but it fits the pattern." "Yeah, it fits." I closed the folder and stood up. "Thanks for this, Gabe. I owe you." "You don't owe me anything. Just be careful, Jake. Guys like Trevor don't like being cornered." I drove home with my mind racing. The pieces were starting to come together, and the picture they formed wasn't pretty. Trevor wasn't just having an affair with my wife, he was using her, and she was either too naive to see it or too infatuated to care. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I created fake social media accounts. It was easier than I'd expected. Within an hour, I had profiles on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, all under the name Mike Thompson, with a generic profile picture I'd found online. From my fake accounts, I could see Sienna's posts without her knowing I was watching. What I found made my jaw clench. Over the past 3 months, her posts had changed dramatically. where she used to share family photos and work achievements. Now it was all about living your best life and never settling for less than you deserve. There were photos of expensive dinners, designer handbags, and nights out at upscale bars I knew we couldn't afford. But it was the comments that really got to me. Trevor was all over her posts, leaving heart emojis and comments like, "You deserve the world," and "Some people are just meant for bigger things." And Sienna was responding with flirty messages that made my skin crawl. The worst part was that Lila was liking and commenting on these posts too. My own daughter was cheering on her mother's affair, probably without even realizing what she was doing. I scrolled back through months of posts, documenting everything, screenshots, timestamps, the whole digital paper trail. If this ended up in divorce court, I wanted evidence. Around 5 o'clock, I got a text from Sienna. "Working late tonight? Don't wait up." I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "Okay, hope the Mansfield project goes well." She responded with a thumbs-up emoji. No words, just a cartoon thumb. 15 years of marriage reduced to a digital gesture. I made dinner for Lila and me, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, comfort food that reminded me of simpler times. We ate mostly in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. "Dad," Lila said as we were cleaning up, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you think Mom's happy?" It was another loaded question, but this time I decided to be honest. "I think your mother is going through some changes right now. She's trying to figure out what she wants from life." "And what do you want?" I paused, a dish towel in my hands. What did I want? A year ago, the answer would have been simple. I wanted my family to be happy and healthy. I wanted my business to grow. I wanted to maybe take a vacation somewhere warm. Now I wanted the truth. I wanted accountability. I wanted the people who had betrayed me to face consequences for their actions. "I want honesty," I said finally. "I want people to be who they say they are." Lila nodded like that made sense to her. Maybe it did. Teenagers had a pretty good radar for authenticity. After she went upstairs to do homework, I sat in my office and continued my research. I'd found Trevor's business website, which was full of testimonials that seemed too good to be true. A little digging revealed that several of the satisfied customers were actually stock photos with fake names attached. I also found records of the complaints Gabe had mentioned, plus a few more that hadn't made it into his folder. The pattern was clear. Trevor was running his business into the ground, and he was getting increasingly desperate to keep the money flowing. Around 9 o'clock, I made a decision. I grabbed my keys and drove to the Riverside Motel. The parking lot was about half full, which seemed to be average for a Wednesday night. I parked at the diner next door and ordered a cup of coffee, positioning myself at a window table with a clear view of room 237. At 9:15, Trevor's silver BMW pulled into the lot. He parked directly in front of room 237, like he'd done this before. He sat in his car for a few minutes, probably checking his phone, then got out and knocked on the door. The door opened immediately, and I caught a glimpse of blonde hair before it closed again. My wife was already inside, waiting for him. I sat there for 2 hours, nursing 3 cups of increasingly bitter coffee and watching that closed door. The waitress probably thought I was some kind of private investigator or jealous husband. She wasn't wrong on the second count. At 11:30, the door opened again. Trevor came out first, straightening his tie and looking around the parking lot nervously. Sienna followed a few minutes later, her hair slightly messed up and her lipstick gone. They didn't leave together. Trevor drove off first, and Sienna waited another 10 minutes before getting in her car. Professional discretion, I supposed. I followed her home from a distance, staying far enough back that she wouldn't notice. She beat me there by about 5 minutes, long enough to get upstairs and pretend to be asleep when I came in. I stood in our bedroom doorway, looking at her supposedly sleeping form. Her breathing was too controlled, too even. She was faking it. "How was work?" I asked quietly. She didn't respond, but I saw her shoulders tense slightly. "The Mansfield project must be really demanding," I continued. "All those late nights, all that hands-on collaboration." Still nothing, but her breathing changed slightly. I went to the bathroom and brushed my teeth, taking my time. When I came back, she had rolled over to face the wall, putting as much distance between us as the bed would allow. I lay down on my side and stared at the ceiling, planning my next move. Tomorrow was Thursday, and I had a feeling it was going to be a very interesting day. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of gray, drizzling rain that made everything look dirty and depressing. The perfect weather for what I had planned. Sienna was already gone when I woke up, which wasn't unusual lately. She'd been leaving earlier and coming home later, always with some excuse about client meetings or project deadlines. I found a note on the kitchen counter. Taking Lila to school, back late tonight, another client dinner. Another client dinner. Right. I made coffee and settled into my office to work, but my mind kept drifting to the evening ahead. I'd spent half the night planning, and I thought I had a solid strategy. The key was patience and timing. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Dataflow Solutions, this is Jake. Jake, buddy, it's Trevor Mansfield. I nearly choked on my coffee. Trevor, what a surprise. Listen, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Sienna. His voice had that fake friendliness that car salesmen perfected. I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about grabbing a drink and catching up. Oh yeah? Absolutely. In fact, I'm free tonight if you are. There's this great little bar downtown, Murphy's Pub. You know it? I knew it. It was about 3 blocks from the Riverside Motel. Sure, I know Murphy's. Perfect. How about 8 o'clock? We can talk about old times, maybe discuss some business opportunities. Business opportunities. That was rich. Sounds great, Trevor. I'll see you there. Fantastic. Oh, and Jake, maybe don't mention it to Sienna. You know how wives get about guys' nights out? Of course. Our secret. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and smiled for the first time in days. Trevor was making this almost too easy. He wanted me out of the house tonight, probably so he could have his little rendezvous with my wife without worrying about me showing up unexpectedly. What he didn't know was that I'd already figured out his pattern. What he really didn't know was that I had no intention of showing up at Murphy's Pub. I spent the rest of the day making preparations. First, I drove to an electronics store in the next town over and bought a small digital camera with night vision capability. The kid at the counter assumed I was a hunting enthusiast and gave me a long lecture about the best spots for wildlife photography. Then I stopped at a hardware store and picked up some supplies. Nothing dramatic, just a few items that might come in handy later. The elderly clerk didn't even look twice at my purchases. My final stop was at Gabe's gym. I found him working with a teenage boxer, teaching the kid how to throw a proper jab. Take 5, Tommy, Gabe said when he saw me. Work the speed bag for a while. We walked to his office, and I filled him in on the morning's phone call. So he's trying to get you out of the house, Gabe said. Classic move. That's what I figured. The question is, what do I do about it? Gabe leaned back in his chair, studying my face. What do you want to do about it? I want to catch them in the act. Get proof that even Sienna can't deny. And then what? It was a good question. I'd been so focused on gathering evidence that I hadn't really thought about the end game. I guess I confront them, make them face what they've done. Jake, let me tell you something I learned in the ring, Gabe said. The best fighters aren't the ones who throw the hardest punches. They're the ones who wait for the perfect opening and then strike with precision. Meaning? Meaning you get one shot at this. If you tip your hand too early, they'll just deny everything and be more careful in the future. But if you wait for the right moment... He shrugged. Well, let's just say it's hard to deny photographic evidence. I nodded slowly. So I document everything tonight. Document it, but don't act on it. Not yet. Let them think they're getting away with it. Meanwhile, you keep gathering evidence, building your case. How long do I wait? Until you have enough ammunition to end this thing permanently. I left the gym with a clearer sense of purpose. Tonight wasn't about confrontation. It was about intelligence gathering. At 6 o'clock, I called Trevor's number. Trevor, it's Jake. I'm really sorry, but I have to cancel tonight. Client emergency, you know how it is? Oh, that's too bad, buddy. Rain check? Absolutely. Maybe next week? Sure thing. Well, I guess I'll just have a quiet night at home then. Yeah, me too. Take care, Trevor. I hung up and immediately called the house phone from my cell, just in case Sienna was listening to our messages. I left a long, detailed message about having to work late on a server crisis, how I'd probably be at the office until midnight, how sorry I was to miss dinner. Then I settled in to wait. At 7:30, I parked my truck behind a closed gas station about a block from our house. I had a clear view of our driveway, but was far enough away that no one would notice me. At 8:15, Sienna's car pulled out of our driveway. She was dressed up. I could see that much, even from a distance. She turned toward downtown, in the direction of the Riverside Motel. I waited another 10 minutes, then followed. The motel parking lot was busier than it had been on Wednesday night. I counted at least a dozen cars, which made it easier for me to blend in. I parked at the far end of the lot, behind a rusty pickup truck that provided good cover. Trevor's BMW was already there, parked in front of room 237. The curtains were drawn, but I could see light seeping around the edges. I got out of my truck and walked casually toward the motel office like I was a potential customer. The desk clerk was watching a small television and barely looked up when I passed by his window. Room 237 was at the end of the building, with a small window on the side wall that faced away from the parking lot. Perfect. I circled around behind the building, staying in the shadows. The area back there was overgrown with weeds and littered with empty bottles and cigarette butts. Not exactly romantic, but it served my purposes. The side window had a gap in the curtains, just wide enough for my camera lens. I could hear voices inside, Sienna's laugh, Trevor's deeper rumble. They sounded relaxed, comfortable, like they'd done this many times before. I set up the camera on a small tripod I'd brought and adjusted the settings for low light. The night vision feature worked better than I'd expected. Through the viewfinder, I could see them clearly. They were sitting on the bed, sharing a bottle of wine. Sienna was wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, something that probably cost more than my truck payment. Trevor was in his usual expensive suit, but his tie was loosened and his jacket was draped over a chair. They were talking, but I couldn't make out the words through the window. Body language told the story well enough, though. Sienna was leaning into him, laughing at whatever he was saying. Trevor had his hand on her knee, thumb tracing small circles on her skin. I took photos steadily, documenting everything. The wine, the intimate positioning, the way Sienna looked at him like he was the most fascinating man in the world, the way she used to look at me back when we were dating. After about 20 minutes, Trevor stood up and walked to the window. For a terrifying moment, I thought he'd seen me, but he was just adjusting the curtains to close the gap completely. I packed up my equipment and moved to a different position, one that gave me a view of the parking lot and the front door. If I couldn't document what happened inside, I could at least record when they left. I sat in the weeds behind a dumpster, feeling like the world's most pathetic private investigator. My jeans were getting soaked from the damp ground, and I was pretty sure I'd knelt in something unpleasant, but I stayed put. At 10:45, the door to room 237 opened. Trevor came out first, looking around nervously before walking to his car. He drove off without looking back. Sienna emerged 5 minutes later, checking her phone as she walked to her car. Even from a distance, I could see that her hair was messed up and her dress was wrinkled. I waited until she was gone, then walked back to my truck. The whole operation had taken less than 3 hours, but it felt like a lifetime. On the drive home, I thought about what Gabe had said. I had evidence now, solid proof of the affair, but what was I going to do with it? The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Sienna's car was already there, and I could see a light on in our bedroom window. She was probably in the shower, washing off the evidence of her evening. I sat in my truck for a few minutes, looking at our house. 15 years ago, we'd picked it out together, walking through empty rooms and imagining our future. We'd planned where the Christmas tree would go, which room would be the nursery, how we'd landscape the backyard. Now it felt like a stage set for a play I didn't want to be in anymore. I went inside quietly, hanging my keys on the hook by the door. The shower was running upstairs, just as I'd predicted. I could hear Sienna humming something, probably the same song Trevor had been playing on his car radio. I went to my office and uploaded the photos from the camera to my computer. The images were clear, damning, and completely heartbreaking. There was my wife of 15 years, betraying our marriage vows with a man who saw her as nothing more than a business opportunity. I created a new folder on my computer and labeled it Evidence. Then I started organizing everything I'd collected: photos, screenshots of social media posts, documentation of Trevor's business practices, records of Sienna's spending habits. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. I could hear Sienna moving around upstairs, probably getting ready for bed. In a few minutes, she'd come downstairs to check if I was home, see the light under my office door, and assume I was working late, just like my voicemail had said. She'd slip into bed with the satisfaction of a woman who thought she was getting away with something. She'd probably sleep better than she had in months, but her peaceful sleep wouldn't last much longer. I was done being the oblivious husband, the small-town loser who wasn't enough for her lifestyle. It was time to show Sienna and Trevor what happened when you underestimated Jake Williams. I turned off my computer and headed upstairs. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. Friday morning brought sunshine for the first time in a week, which felt like a good omen. I was up early, making coffee and planning my day while Sienna slept in. She'd been exhausted lately, which made perfect sense considering her extracurricular activities. I was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing my evidence folder on my laptop, when Laya came downstairs. She was dressed for school, but moving slowly, like she hadn't slept well. "Morning, Dad," she said, grabbing a granola bar from the pantry. "Morning, kiddo. You okay? You look tired." She shrugged. "Just stayed up too late scrolling through Instagram. You know how it is?" Actually, I was starting to understand exactly how it was. Anything interesting happening in the social media world? The usual drama. Mom posted some photos from her dinner last night. She looked really happy. I felt my jaw tighten. Did she now? Yeah, she was at this fancy restaurant downtown, the kind with cloth napkins and everything. Lila paused, studying my face. She said you were working late. I was. Server emergency. Right. Lila didn't sound convinced. Dad, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever look at Mom's Instagram? It was an odd question, and the way she asked it made me think there was more to it. Not really. Why? Just wondering. Some of her posts lately have been different. Different how? Lila hesitated, like she was trying to figure out how much to say. She's been posting a lot about living your best life and not settling for less than you deserve. And there are all these comments from people I don't recognize. What kind of comments? Flirty ones, from men. She looked uncomfortable, including Mr. Mansfield. So even my 16-year-old daughter had picked up on the inappropriateness of Trevor's social media behavior. That was both reassuring and deeply disturbing. What do you think about that? I asked carefully. I think it's weird. Like, he's your friend, right? So why is he commenting heart emojis on Mom's photos? Out of the mouths of babes. That is weird, isn't it? Super weird. And Mom always responds to his comments, but she barely likes your posts anymore. I hadn't realized Lila was paying such close attention to the family dynamics playing out on social media. It made me wonder what else she'd noticed. Lila, has your mom said anything to you about changes in our family? She shifted uncomfortably. Like what kind of changes? Any kind. About me, about our marriage, about the future. She said you guys were going through a rough patch, but that it wasn't my fault. Lila paused. She also said that sometimes people grow apart, and that's nobody's fault either. Classic Sienna, laying the groundwork for a narrative that painted her as the victim of circumstance rather than the architect of betrayal. And what do you think about that? I asked. I think there's probably more to it than she's telling me. Lila looked directly at me. I'm not stupid, Dad. I can see what's happening. The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. What do you see? I see Mom acting like a teenager with a crush. I see her spending money we don't have on clothes and dinners. I see her staying out late and coming home happy in a way that has nothing to do with us. Lila's voice got smaller. And I see you pretending not to notice. I stared at my daughter, this almost adult who had somehow become wiser than both her parents. I'm not pretending anymore. Good, she said firmly, because pretending isn't helping anyone. After Lila left for school, I sat in the quiet kitchen and thought about what she'd said. My daughter was right. Pretending wasn't helping anyone, but I wasn't ready for full disclosure either. Not yet. Sienna came downstairs around 9, dressed for another day at her marketing firm. She looked refreshed and energetic, like someone who'd had a very satisfying evening. Good morning, she said, pouring herself coffee. How was your server emergency last night? Resolved, I said. Crisis averted. Good. I know how stressful those technical problems can be. The casual way she lied to my face was almost impressive. If I hadn't seen her at the motel with my own eyes, I might have believed her concerned wife act. How was your client dinner? I asked. Productive. We made some real progress on the campaign strategy. Which client was it again? For just a moment, she hesitated. Hartwell Industries, the manufacturing company. Interesting. Not Trevor, then. She was creating layers of deception, probably in case I decided to check up on her story. That's great, I said. I'm glad it went well. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I'll be late again tonight. Another client meeting? Of course. I'll hold down the fort here. After she left, I got to work on phase 2 of my plan. If Sienna wanted to play games, I'd show her what a real player looked like. My first call was to a guy named Danny Rodriguez, who ran a small private investigation service out of the next town over. We'd gone to college together, and he owed me a favor from when I'd helped him set up his computer systems. Jake Williams, Danny said when he answered the phone. Long time no hear. What can I do for you? I need some information on someone, Danny. Discreetly. What kind of information? Financial records, business dealings, anything that might be public record but hard to find. Danny was quiet for a moment. This wouldn't have anything to do with a certain car dealer named Trevor Mansfield, would it? I was startled. How did you? Word gets around in a small town, Jake, especially when someone starts asking questions about the same person you're interested in. Someone else is investigating Trevor? Not investigating exactly. But I've had 2 calls this week from people asking about his business practices. Seems like Mr. Mansfield has been making some enemies lately. This was unexpected, but potentially useful. What kind of enemies? The kind who lend money and expect to get paid back on time? Trevor's been playing fast and loose with his financing, and some of his creditors are getting nervous. How nervous? Nervous enough to hire people like me to keep an eye on his assets. Nervous enough to start asking questions about his personal life and whether he's hiding money somewhere. I felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Danny, what would it cost for you to share some of that information with an old friend? For you? Nothing. But I want to know why you're interested. I gave him the abbreviated version. Cheating wife, family friend turned backstabber. The need for leverage in what was probably going to be a messy divorce. Damn, Jake. I'm sorry. That's rough. It is what it is. But I'd rather go into battle armed with facts. I'll email you everything I've got by this afternoon. And Jake, be careful. Guys like Trevor don't like being cornered, and they especially don't like having their financial problems exposed. My second call was to Mrs. Dorsey, our elderly neighbor who knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing it. Mrs. Dorsey, it's Jake Williams from next door. Oh, hello, dear. How are you holding up? An interesting choice of words. I'm fine. Why do you ask? Well, with all the changes in your household lately, I just wanted to make sure you were taking care of yourself. What kind of changes? Mrs. Dorsey lowered her voice conspiratorially. The late nights, the fancy cars in your driveway, Sienna's new wardrobe. People notice these things, you know. What do people say about it? They say your wife is going through some kind of midlife crisis, spending money like it's going out of style, acting like a woman half her age. She paused. They also say that Trevor Mansfield has been very attentive to her professional development. The way she said professional development made it clear that the neighborhood gossip mill was already churning. That's interesting, I said. I hadn't realized people were paying such close attention. Oh, honey, in a town this size, everyone pays attention to everyone else's business. It's just human nature. Mrs. Dorsey, hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to make sure certain information got shared with the right people, how would they go about that? She chuckled. Hypothetically? They'd call me. I know everyone worth knowing in this town, and I'm not shy about sharing interesting news. Good to know. I might have some interesting news to share soon. I'll be here, dear. I'm always here. My third call was to Gabe, to let him know how things were progressing. You're moving fast, he said, after I filled him in on the morning's activities. I'm tired of being reactive. It's time to take control of the situation. Just remember what I said about timing. You want to hit them when they least expect it, with maximum impact. I'm thinking about the Chamber of Commerce dinner next Friday. Trevor's supposed to get some kind of business achievement award. Gabe whistled low. That's a big public event. A lot of important people there. Exactly. If I'm going to expose them, I want an audience that matters. That's cold, Jake. I like it. The rest of the day was spent organizing my evidence and planning the specifics of my public revelation. Danny's email arrived around 3 o'clock, and it was even better than I'd hoped. Trevor was in serious financial trouble. He'd borrowed against all 3 car lots, maxed out multiple credit cards, and taken several personal loans from private lenders. His monthly expenses were nearly double his legitimate income, which explained why he'd been cutting corners with his customers. More interesting was the pattern of his spending. Large cash withdrawals, expensive dinners, hotel charges, jewelry purchases, all the hallmarks of a man trying to impress someone with money he didn't have. I cross-referenced the dates with Sienna's social media posts and found perfect correlation. Every expensive dinner she'd posted about coincided with one of Trevor's cash withdrawals. Every piece of new jewelry she'd worn in photos matched up with purchases on his credit card statements. He wasn't just having an affair with my wife. He was financing it with borrowed money, probably hoping she'd help him get access to better business opportunities through her marketing connections. It was pathetic and infuriating and absolutely perfect for my purposes. That evening, Sienna came home around 10 o'clock, claiming another successful client meeting. She was carrying a small shopping bag from an upscale boutique downtown. Treat yourself? I asked, nodding at the bag. Just a small celebration. We landed a big account today. Congratulations. Which account? Again, the slight hesitation. Riverside Development. They're planning a major commercial project. I nodded like I believed her, but I made a mental note to look into Riverside Development. Something told me it would turn out to be another fabrication. I'm exhausted, Sienna said, heading for the stairs. I'm going to take a bath and go to bed early. Good idea. You've been working so hard lately. She paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked back at me. For a moment, I thought I saw something like guilt in her expression. But then it was gone, replaced by the cool detachment that had become her default mode with me. Jake, she said quietly, We should talk soon. About us, about where we're headed. Whenever you're ready, I said. Maybe this weekend, after things settle down at work. Sure, this weekend. She went upstairs, and I heard the bathwater running a few minutes later. I sat in my chair, thinking about her words. She wanted to talk about where we were headed. Translation. She wanted to ask for a divorce so she could pursue her relationship with Trevor without the inconvenience of a husband. Well, we'd definitely be having that conversation. Just not the way she expected. I pulled out my phone and started composing a text message to Mrs. Dorsey. That interesting news I mentioned? It's going to be very interesting indeed. The Chamber of Commerce dinner was held at the Riverside Country Club, the fanciest venue in our little town. I'd been to exactly 2 events there in my entire life. Our wedding reception 15 years ago, and a business networking mixer that Sienna had dragged me to last year. Tonight felt different. Tonight, I wasn't the reluctant small business owner being dragged to a social event. Tonight, I was a man with a mission. I'd spent the week making final preparations. Danny had provided additional financial records showing that Trevor's situation was even worse than initially thought. He'd apparently borrowed money from some very unsavory people, the kind who didn't accept the check is in the mail as a valid excuse. Mrs. Dorsey had done her part too, spreading carefully selected pieces of information through her network of gossips and busybodies. By Thursday, half the town was whispering about Trevor's business practices and Sienna's sudden lifestyle changes. The beauty of small-town gossip was its organic nature. Once you planted a seed, it grew and spread on its own, taking on a life of its own. People started connecting dots, remembering odd details, sharing their own observations. Sienna had been unusually nervous all week, checking her phone constantly and jumping at unexpected sounds. She'd also been nicer to me than she'd been in months, which I recognized as guilt-induced overcompensation. "You look handsome," she said as we got ready for the dinner. She was wearing a new dress, something elegant and expensive that I was certain Trevor had paid for. "Thanks. You look beautiful, too." And she did. That was the tragedy of the whole situation. Sienna was genuinely beautiful, inside and out, or at least she had been. The woman I'd fallen in love with was still there somewhere, buried under layers of ambition and dissatisfaction and whatever poison Trevor had whispered in her ear. "Jake," she said, adjusting my tie, "about that conversation we were going to have." "Tonight's not the time," I said gently. "Let's just enjoy the evening." She nodded, but I could see the relief in her eyes. She wasn't ready for that conversation yet, probably because she hadn't figured out how to spin the narrative in her favor. We drove to the country club in relative silence, both lost in our own thoughts. The parking lot was full of expensive cars and well-dressed people. Trevor's silver BMW was parked near the entrance, gleaming under the streetlights like a beacon of false success. Inside, the main dining room had been decorated with white tablecloths and centerpieces of local flowers. A small stage had been set up at the front for the evening's presentations. I spotted Trevor immediately. He was holding court near the bar, surrounded by a group of local business owners who were hanging on his every word. "There's Trevor," Sienna said, and I didn't miss the way her voice softened when she said his name. "So I see. Looks like he's the man of the hour." We made our way through the crowd, stopping to chat with people I knew from various business associations. Everyone was friendly and polite, but I caught the subtle glances and whispered conversations that suggested the gossip mill had been working overtime. "Jake, Sienna." Trevor appeared at my elbow, wearing his most expensive suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, shaking his hand. "Congratulations on the award." "Thanks, buddy. It's quite an honor." Sienna leaned in to give Trevor a hug that lasted just a beat too long. "You deserve it," she said. "All your hard work is finally paying off." Well, I couldn't have done it without the support of good friends like you two. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. We found our assigned table, which was mercifully far from Trevor's. I'd specifically requested a table near the back when I'd bought our tickets, claiming I preferred to avoid the spotlight. In reality, I wanted a good view of the entire room for what was coming. Dinner was the usual rubber chicken and overcooked vegetables that seemed to be mandatory at these events. I picked at my food while Sienna made small talk with the other people at our table. She was in full social mode, charming and vivacious, the perfect corporate wife. Around 8:30, the formal program began. The chamber president gave a brief welcome speech, followed by presentations of various awards and recognitions. Trevor's award was saved for last. Young Entrepreneur of the Year, complete with an engraved plaque and a brief speech opportunity. Trevor took the stage to enthusiastic applause, looking every inch the successful businessman. His speech was polished and confident, full of platitudes about hard work and community support and the American dream. I couldn't have achieved any of this without the people who believed in me, he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. My family, my friends, my business partners, and especially the wonderful people of this community who trusted me with their business. The applause was warm and genuine. These people really believed in Trevor's success story. They had no idea they were clapping for a man who was defrauding his customers and sleeping with other men's wives. But they were about to find out. As Trevor finished his speech and started to leave the stage, I stood up from my table. The movement caught the attention of several people nearby, including Sienna, who looked at me with confusion. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "Before we finish tonight, I'd like to say something." Trevor paused at the edge of the stage, his smile faltering slightly. The chamber president looked uncertain. This wasn't part of the program. "I'm Jake Williams," I continued, walking toward the front of the room. "I run Data Flow Solutions here in town, and I've known Trevor for over 20 years. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sienna was staring at me with growing alarm, probably sensing that whatever was coming wouldn't be good. "I think it's wonderful that we're recognizing local entrepreneurs," I said, my voice calm and conversational. "Success should be celebrated, but I also think it's important that we understand what real success looks like." I reached the front of the room and turned to face the crowd. Every eye in the place was on me now, including Trevor's. His face had gone pale, and I could see the first hints of panic in his expression. "Real success," I continued, "is built on honesty, integrity, and respect for others. It's about creating value, not just extracting it. It's about building something lasting, not just grabbing what you can while you can." "Jake," Trevor said, his voice tight, "maybe this isn't the time?" "Actually, Trevor, I think this is exactly the time." I smiled at him, and I could see him flinch. "See, I've been doing some research lately, learning about different approaches to business, different definitions of success." I pulled out my phone and held it up. For instance, I learned that real success doesn't require lying to customers about vehicle histories. It doesn't require charging hidden fees or voiding warranties on technicalities. The murmurs in the crowd were getting louder now. Several people were pulling out their own phones, probably recording what was starting to look like a very public confrontation. "I also learned," I continued, "that real success doesn't require borrowing money from questionable sources to finance a lifestyle you can't afford. It doesn't require seducing other men's wives to gain access to business opportunities." Gasps echoed through the room. Sienna had gone white as a sheet, her hand pressed to her mouth. Trevor was shaking his head frantically, but he looked like a man caught in headlights. "Jake, stop," he said. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I held up my phone again. "Because I have photos, Trevor. I have financial records. I have documentation of every lie you've told and every person you've cheated." I swiped to the first photo. Trevor and Sienna at the Riverside Motel, sharing wine and intimacy that should have been reserved for her marriage. The reaction was immediate and explosive. People stood up to get a better look. Voices rose in shock and outrage, and someone near the back shouted, "Is that Sienna Williams?" "Yes," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "That's my wife, and that's our friend Trevor, showing her the kind of personal attention that goes well beyond professional consultation." Sienna was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she realized the full extent of her public humiliation. Part of me felt sorry for her. She looked small and broken and utterly devastated. But the larger part of me, the part that had been betrayed and lied to and made to feel inadequate for months, felt a cold satisfaction at seeing her face the consequences of her choices. "The really interesting thing," I continued, advancing to the next photo, "is how Trevor financed this affair. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, jewelry, designer clothes, all paid for with borrowed money while he was defaulting on legitimate business loans." This photo showed receipts and credit card statements, evidence of Trevor's financial irresponsibility laid out in black and white. Trevor finally found his voice. "This is slander," he said desperately. "Jake's obviously having some kind of breakdown." "Am I?" I turned to face him directly. "Then explain the private investigators who've been documenting your business practices. Explain the creditors who are looking for assets to seize. Explain the customers who are filing complaints with the Attorney General's office." Trevor's face crumpled. He looked around the room desperately, seeking support or sympathy, but found only shocked faces and judgmental stares. "The truth is," I said, addressing the crowd again, "Trevor Mansfield isn't a successful entrepreneur. He's a con man who got in over his head and decided to drag innocent people down with him." I clicked to the final photo, a compilation of customer complaints, financial records, and documentation of Trevor's lies and deceptions. "This is what real investigation looks like," I said. "This is what happens when someone decides to look behind the facade and see what's really there." The room had gone completely silent, except for the sound of Sienna's quiet sobbing. Trevor stood frozen on the stage, looking like a man who just watched his entire world collapse. "So yes," I concluded, "let's celebrate success tonight. Let's celebrate the kind of success that's built on truth, integrity, and respect for others. The kind of success that doesn't require destroying other people's lives to achieve." I put my phone away and looked directly at Trevor. "Congratulations on your award, buddy. I hope it was worth it." Then I walked out of the room, leaving behind the chaos and the shouting and the complete destruction of two people who had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. Outside, the night air was cool and clean, a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. I could hear the commotion continuing behind me, voices raised in anger and shock, the sound of chairs scraping and people moving around. I got in my truck and sat there for a moment, letting the reality of what I'd just done sink in. There was no going back from this. I'd just publicly destroyed my marriage and probably ended Trevor's business career in this town. But as I drove home through the quiet streets, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The pretending was over. The lies were exposed. The people who had betrayed me were facing the consequences of their actions. For the first time in a long time, I felt like Jake Williams again. Not the inadequate husband or the small-town loser, but the man who had built a business from nothing and refused to be anyone's fool. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Lila was spending the night at a friend's house, which was probably for the best. She didn't need to see the aftermath of what was about to happen. I went inside and poured myself a drink. Good whiskey, not the cheap stuff. Then I sat in my chair and waited for Sienna to come home. She'd have to face me eventually. And when she did, we'd finally have that conversation she'd been putting off. But this time, it would be on my terms.